Hi there, I'm Annalisa from the team behind Parlay, and I had the pleasure of sitting down with Meagan, an incredible Parlay teacher who I think has really mastered the art of facilitating discussion based courses. I was so inspired by her expertise, and our conversation actually went longer than expected because she has so much wisdom to share about discussions. So feel free to use the timestamps below and jump to different points in our conversation that you think are most interesting. I hope you enjoy.
My name is Meagan Frazier. I am an upper school English teacher and the IB and AP coordinator at Taipei American School. This is year 17 for me. And earlier when I was teaching middle school, I fell in love with the Harkness style of discussions. I had tried Socratic seminars and fish bowls and all sorts of things, but I like the idea of a class that was based around the readings and the discussion. And then we could tie in, those larger fishbowl activities, debates, and things like that. And so I went to a writing workshop training at Exeter, Phillips Exeter Academy, where they really relied a lot on the round table. And I was a middle school teacher, so I did not get a round table at my school, but I could simulate that experience with my students. So over the past 7 years or so, I've been slowly adding in more moments of discussions and really trying to intentionally train my students in their speaking and listening skills. And I've also noticed that when they acquire the academic speaking skills, their academic writing skills improve as well. And so academic and analytical writing is a huge part of what I do as well. And so I think that those two things pair really nicely for me to be able to push students to the next level in their writing as well. So as I planned out my course, Literature, Justice, and Law, because I was creating it from scratch, I knew that I wanted a Harkness style discussion-based course where that was a really big part of it, because I recall my own time in college and in grad school, and that's a huge part of the learning is you do the reading and you come and you sit down and you kind of grapple with these really complicated topics. Discussions are just about every day in the class, unless we're working on a larger project. At the beginning of the year, I like to say, and I got this from somebody, Adam Ruderman, if I'm not mistaken, I control the first third of the discussion. We do discussion routine. So one speaks after another. You're only allowed so many times to speak, that style. And so we do different discussion routines for right up until October. I don't release them until they're full Parlay open live discussion until October. Up until then, we're just doing smaller and written discussions in the app.
Wow. Okay. So you're starting with written discussions, and then are you using Parlay at all in that process when you're kind of doing those more teacher-led discussions?
Toward the end. So
Okay.
in the beginning, it is very much like one person speaks after another person. And then
Yes.
I think
Okay.
the second routine is you then have to paraphrase what the person in front of you said. And so once we move to, I believe it's called string of voices or hacky sack discussion, where a topic has to stay in the air for at least 3 touches before switching the discussion point. Once we move into hacky sack, then I start kind of rolling out Parlay a little bit, teaching them how to tap in and tap out and things like that. But my goal is by the end of the year, because I show them a video of like what a really good Harkness discussion looks like. And I tell them, this is our goal. This is where we're headed. My goal is by the end of the year that one of them is moderating the discussion and we can sustain it for half an hour to 40 minutes. Our classes are 80 minutes. And so I think, okay, 45 minutes is a really nice, sustained discussion, minimal awkward silences. We're just constantly building and complicating the ideas. Minimal arguments because it's not a debate, it's a discussion. But that's the goal is to really turn it over to them. And then I just become one of the participants in the discussion.
That's awesome. And so when you're in that first building up period, what are some common challenges that students have when they're building up those initial skills to be able to run the discussion themselves?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest problem, and I wouldn't even call it a problem, it's just that people process in different ways at different times. So teaching my verbal processors to allow space and time for the internal processors to be able to process their thoughts notes, and planning in time for them to journal down their thoughts before we start the discussion. So within Parlay, of course, I open up the notes and they get 5 to 7 minutes to jot their notes down. If it's a written discussion that I'm turning into a live discussion, well, then they've probably had 3 or 4 days to just collaborate with one another. And then they usually pull it up as a split screen. So they have what they wrote in the written discussion and they're ready to rock. But in those first couple of days, my students have journals. And so they will get the question, and that'll probably be their due now when they come in, is to journal about that question, pull up all the evidence that they have so that they have something to say. So there's an idea of there's something to say. The other thing is when the discussion switches focus and the student's like, oh, we're not talking about this one thing anymore, and I don't know what to say now. So kind of looking for that and giving them time to pause just to jot down their thoughts. And I tell them that in the beginning, it's going to be very awkward. It's very stilted because I'm only allowing them to speak a certain number of times. I'm teaching them how to use their speaking skills. We use PVLEG by Eric Palmer. And so making sure that that space can happen. And once they know that there's a space for them to speak and that they can pop in and just pop out, then that's good. I also give them the goal of trying to speak at least twice per class. I would like for it to be more than that, but we talk a lot about airspace, so making it concise. It's also hard for them to make their thoughts short, sweet, to the point, get in, get out. Sometimes they don't know what else to say, and then they always end with yeah. that. So teaching them out of that.
That's awesome. So when you are using Parlay, are you always using a written roundtable to prepare, or in what scenarios might you really want them to get their ideas out in a written context first, or have some of that written dialogue?
Yeah. So usually before our final roundtable in a unit, they will have the essential question of the unit and the smaller iteration of the questions that we've had throughout, where they can collect their thoughts and respond. Usually they choose 2 of the 5 questions because I'm really huge on student choice and agency. And so they know that, okay, this is coming up. I know 2 of the questions really, really well. I also use the written roundtable when we do the inner circle, outer circle, sometimes called the fishbowl discussion, so that they can prepare. They know their exact questions that they're going to respond to. And then they get into, because that's even more pressure because there's a group of people around them watching them speak and work through it. So those are usually the 2 scenarios that I use the written roundtable. I also use it from the get-go. It's one of their first jobs. It's how do you use Parlay video? And then they introduce themselves to the class in the written roundtable, just so that they kind of get used to the tools and editing. So I use written roundtable usually to prep those bigger discussions. For the smaller ones, we just go into it from wherever we are in the class. So I'll tell them, okay, we're now going to have a Parlay discussion on last night's reading, and you're going to have 7 minutes to jot down your notes and start the timer, and they get their 7 minutes, and then the discussion is open. They know that discussions count as quiz grades in our class. So if you don't perform well with pop quizzes, because I am a huge fan of the pop quiz to make sure that they're reading, they can always recoup those points and show me what they know verbally, because not everybody is really adept at writing. They are by the end of class, but that could be something that they really struggle with, expressing themselves through the written word, but they can verbalize everything that they know. So yes, discussions count as a quiz grade, and they know that. So they know, I want to get in and get my points in so that I can get my points.
Wow, that is really cool. I'm curious, when you're doing these written roundtables, are you reminding them of anything in the discussion, or what are some common pieces of feedback for the written discussions in particular?
So I have kind of switched my gradings more to competencies and outcomes.
Okay.
So they have very specific skills that they're trying to grow in throughout the course. And we use Canvas, so it's pretty easy for me to load in those outcomes and personal skills standards that then they can master, and they can track their mastery throughout the year. I've also loaded those in, and a lot of them are very similar to the default ones that are already in Parlay. So a lot of their comments initially are around using evidence and citing their evidence and responding to anyone who responds to them and making sure that they respond to at least 2 classmates. So when I write up my instructions, I always include that. And I also always post an exemplar, whether it's my own. If we're writing it in class, I'll write it right in front of them. So, and they don't, well, maybe they do know this, but like after the first 2 times, I probably already just have it and I can copy and paste it in. But for other written roundtables, I have exemplars from years past. So I can post that and say, this is from 2021, and here's what makes this an exemplar response. So that if they post theirs and then they see the exemplar, then they can always go back and edit. I also give them 2 due dates because I realized that my students are procrastinators. And if I give them a deadline for the roundtable or for a discussion, they will not log in to post their initial post until like right before it's due. And so I give them a deadline for the initial post, and I go in and that's the complete, incomplete grade. Did you post? And then around 3 days later, or usually we have A day, B day schedule. So then the next class, their response to the post is their second grade. So they get their 2 grades on the written roundtable.
Okay. And then that, of course, gives lots of space for all the commenting and some of that dialogue to happen.
Yeah, because I realized that like me just telling them, oh, you need to go in and you need to be active in this was not translating. So I just had this like stroke of genius of what if I gave them 2 deadlines, and like put it into Canvas as 2 assignments, and miraculously things started happening. And even those students who are consistently late, at least they are still posting ahead of time so other people can comment on their posts. Because a lot of times they have really, really good things to say that nobody sees because they posted so late. So
of course.
This kind of fixes that.
Yeah. And so that's pretty much entirely asynchronous at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then they're coming to class, you're working on other activities, or you're actually building on those ideas from those roundtables.
Yeah. And every now and then we might do one in class. Usually it's like the last question or like our exit ticket. And then, but I realized that they really like to take their time to like get their wording right. So it ends up usually being like 20 minutes. So it's a really nice formative assessment to use for them. I also, something else that Amanda and Marie have are the Sesame Street quiz, which works very nice within Parlay. I give them 3 or 4 topics from the chapters that we've read, and they have to choose which one doesn't belong. And so that's a really nice way for them to kind of wrap that up, give them about 20 minutes to type it all out and submit it. So using it in class as a way of formative assessment is really good because for me, it puts it all in one location and I'm not opening up 20 files.
Wow, that's really cool. In terms of the verbal roundtable now, so usually by the time you end up doing verbal roundtables, students have a pretty good foundation for the skills that they need to actually practice. What are you reminding them of in the verbal roundtables? So you try and let them speak for as long as they can. Are you pausing at any points? Are you giving them feedback as a group?
I will pause and take over. So do like teacher tap in to further elaborate or illuminate someone's point. I use the nudge feature a lot for my quieter students. I can just nudge them. It only goes to them. And then, I'm looking at their notes as well. So I can say, hey, this is your time to bring up point 3 that is in your notes. Like, get in there. When I feel that it's becoming more ping pong rather than volleyball, which is the metaphor analogy that I use with the kids, we'll pause it so that they can have some more note-taking time, especially if we've kind of gone into a different direction and we've like added a new question to the set of questions. I also reveal the questions throughout the discussion and take them away as we go. So we have, I'll plan maybe 7 questions and then I'll let them start with 3. And then I'll slowly take them away when I feel like, okay, we have hit that one. We have mastered it. Let's move on to another focus. When they're speaking, I will prompt them to say one another's names. If they're building off of someone, how to challenge people without saying, I disagree. I'm really big on that. I have a different viewpoint. I really agree with this part of your argument, but I would like to complicate it, or I'd like to raise the question, different things like that. So I prompt them when I hear words like I disagree, or when I hear pronouns, she, he, they, instead of the individual's name, I'll say, what's their name, and different things like that, so that they learn one another's cues. And then I give them feedback at the end as a group. And then their individual feedback will say something like, you do a great job tapping into the conversation. I noticed that you spoke 20% more than other students. I'm wondering how you can draw other students into the conversation, and different pieces of feedback like that. So they get the whole group. How did we do as a group? How did we perform as a team? And then from there, they're able to assess their own performance. And this is usually done through a AAA reflection. Again, I stole this from Adam Ruderman, borrowed. What would you add? What would you ask? And assert. What assertions would you make? So they have those 3 things that they say, yep, here's what I would do if this discussion continued. Or I give them like a quick Google form survey on their competencies. How do you think you performed on these moves today? Insufficient evidence, developing, mastered, advanced. That's another thing that I do. In the beginning, I limit it to 1 move that I'm grading or looking for. So I'll be very clear with them before we discuss. Today, I'm looking at your ability to paraphrase what the person before you said. And here are sentence templates or example templates that you can use to paraphrase what a person is saying. Again, those are already in the app, or I've added them in, so they work. And that's something that I've been doing before Parlay, because I'm a huge fan of Dave Stewart Jr. And that's something that it's like, you just give them the move that they want to focus on. Or once they've become more proficient by second semester, what is it that you want to focus on in this conversation today? What is your thing that you're trying to grow in? What is the competency or skill? For some of them, it's speaking louder. For some of them, it's more eye contact. For some of them, it's sharing the airspace. For some of them, it's providing evidence from the text with the citation. So they can jot that down on a Post-it, and that is their goal for that conversation.
That is so cool. So at the beginning of the year, you're only assessing 1 skill. You're kind of slowly releasing that responsibility onto them to make that call of, what should I be focusing on individually?
Yeah. So really, it comes down to like 5 main skills. They're PEEV legs, they're holistic speaking skills, the use of evidence, the ability to paraphrase and build off of someone else, the ability to challenge, and the ability to exhibit curiosity or ask questions. So those are kind of the larger skills that we hit over and over again. And those are the ones that they are specifically assessed on before they move into hacky sack phase, before they move into full Parlay.
Just curious, do you ever have to remind them of eye contact because they have the devices in front of them? I know that some teachers, they're kind of worried about their students and interacting with the device in front of them and how that might take away from the conversation.
Yes, and that is something to assess on, especially early on. You can also see when a student is either moved off the tab or is like not engaged because their little avatar goes gray. And so that's a really easy way to nudge them or pause. The biggest thing that I have to remind them of is not to speak to me, but to speak to everyone in the group. So like I am just a fly on the wall. You actually need to physically move your body depending on the formation in the room and put it in the best location to speak to everyone in the room. But yeah, being off task on the device, it is rare when it happens. And I've noticed that it usually happens again when you have two people just kind of going back and forth and back and forth, and then everyone kind of disengages. So like, that's a really good time to like, let's pause, let's reset, let's add a new question. Let's actually read this one part in the book. And I might call on the kid who's kind of been disengaging for a bit to do that reading to help them re-engage into the conversation.
I'm so impressed, and I wish I was in your class because it's clear that the focus is on developing students' sense of agency, and that's so important, especially at the level that you're teaching at. I think that I obviously believe discussions do that very well, but it seems like you're scaffolding that sense of agency so much, which leads me to, I guess one of my final questions is, you set up discussion-based courses, so you really spend a lot of time with discussions. What's some of the biggest changes that you see in your students as the year goes on? What are some of the either comments that they say or ways that you see them develop as young people?
One of the things that I notice, I'm actually reading their end of course reflections right now, and some of them are like they are more critical of themselves than I am, but they're hyper aware of the atmosphere, which I think is important when you are walking into a new class or a new space. Like, what am I bringing to this atmosphere? They are more bonded as a class. I think, allowing them the space to stumble and make mistakes and really coach them through that has been amazing to see, because you see students who absolutely refuse to say anything. Like, they don't care if they don't get a good grade on it. They're just like, I am not speaking, to feeling more comfortable sharing their thoughts. And even if it's not perfect, getting it out there. And so I think that for them, they feel more bonded as a class, which is always what you want. You want students to feel comfortable with one another, beyond just academic friendships, but actual real social friendships. And their writing also improves, again, which is like my subversive use of discussions, especially because I'm working with a lot of English language learners. English is not a lot of my students' first language, or my students have gone to lots of different schools because I'm at an international school. And so their skills are kind of a little bit all over the place, really strong in one area, weaker in other areas. And so this kind of puts everyone on an even keel. I think it also, what they discover is that they learn more from each other than from me. And it's something I say all the time, but I don't think that they really believe it until they come kind of to the end of the course and they're looking at their entire chart of mastery and growth and how far they've come, and thinking about, who has been the MVT, who's our most valuable teammate, and the things that they point out that individual has done to move the class forward is always really, really nice to see, because I know that they're leaving me and they're looking for these things. Like, they know what should happen in a quality discussion, whether it's academic or not. Like, here are the things that should happen. Like, we should share the airspace. People should actively listen. All of these, people should question. People should be curious about what you're saying. And then if those things aren't happening, this actually is not a good discussion. And that is something that most adults struggle with. So it's really nice to see them in August really struggle to make discussion happen, and then end up in May, early June, and they're doing it. And they're also still very much like, we can still grow in this and this. And I'm like, oh, but it's over, but it's nice.
Oh, that is so wonderful. Is there anything else that you wanted to share, and or any feedback that you have about Parlay? Are there any places that the app falls short, or you wish, could be inside of Parlay?
Well, I wish I could print off the discussion maps. I
Oh,
like
yeah.
showing the students that, but when I used to hand draw the maps, I could post them and students could see exactly how they did, which was always nice. But I think in terms of teaching with the tool, we have, as teachers, we have to be willing to relinquish control. that first live discussion is always scary. Like, how is this going to go? And I'm always amazed at, yeah, it might be slow to start. Like, it might be 3 minutes of just awkward silence and one person speaks. But once they get going, it's really, really nice. And they like it because they see how much control they have over the discussion. I think that for teachers, we have to be willing to kind of let go of that center of the circle idea and be okay with some discussions falling through. Like, not every discussion is going to be great, but that's with or without Parlay. It doesn't always happen. And just doing those techniques with the tools that we know that works to help generate ideation, think, pair, share, stop and jot. All of those things really work to help keep the discussion fresh and going.
That's really great. It sounds like you have all these different protocols that you've kind of accumulated over the years that really help get that going. And when things do get awkward, then that's the perfect teachable moment to bring in those protocols, really.
Yeah, and I mean, with the morning class, it's always going to be hard to get discussions started. You
Right.
always notice that your afternoon classes are just raring to go. And so, yeah, that's something that I've noticed is to kind of play little wake up games with them, or like the ABC game, or like whatever, just to get them talking to one another before diving into the discussion, because they're tired.
What happens when the discussions go off track? How much do you allow for that? And then, when do you need to kind of like bring it back and refocus on your essential question or the specific discussion questions you want them to be gearing towards?
I think discussions going off track is a mark of good discussion, actually. I will argue that, because in kind of exploring those negative spaces, those blank spaces, like we were talking about Blues for Mr. Charlie, and all of a sudden we're talking about Zelda. How did this happen? But it shows me that they are making connections between what we are saying. And sometimes those connections are really, really fuzzy. And so I kind of let them go off the rails for a bit. And then I kind of will say, okay, I'm going to pause and bring us back. What I'm hearing is, and then I'll paraphrase for them what they are saying and how it connects back to the text. And then reintroduce and say, does anybody have anything else to say on this before we move to the next point? And that's totally fine. I think it both models for them the space to kind of stumble through their thoughts a bit, but also, okay, how do I bring my group back to task when we get off task? Because we also do a lot of group work in my class. They teach a lesson to the class. They have mock trials. They do a lot of things. And so they have to be comfortable enough, not calling each other out, but saying, all right, y'all, that was great. That was hilarious. Let's bring it back. So I'm actually okay with that, because again, in those spaces, they are actually gathering their thoughts. And you're also getting people in who might not have wanted to jump in before, and you're building relationships. And that's the point. So I'm actually okay with them going off. Now, obviously, if they're just way, way off the track and like we are never getting back, let's just bring it back, bring it all the way together. But
yeah, no, I love that you kind of have some of that responsibility on the students too, to bring it back. That makes so much sense. And again, if you can make the connection out to that idea, then somebody is certainly capable of making that connection back to the text.
Yeah, it's basically just kind of moving away from the like, my classroom management has to be like, I have to be, and realizing that when you do that, especially with high schoolers, they are going to take up the charge. It makes them feel more like adults. It gets them ready for college, and they don't have to rely on me as much to make the learning happen for them. So, and that's what should be happening at this stage. I should be preparing them to walk into a space and make learning happen. And so that's what and then in middle school, yes, I probably would be a lot more controlled in terms of what they discussed and how they did it. But I would probably also have a lot of our first discussions be like, who's your favorite superhero and different things like that before we moved into the academic space, because that's how their brains think and that's how they would learn. So like, what's the best Spider-Man movie? Because the new one's out right now. I might start them with something like that before diving into like a really deep, heavy social justice topic.
That makes total sense. Okay, well, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I feel like you have shared so much like incredible wisdom. It seems like you've worked really hard and you really are an expert at this. Like this is really cool. And obviously you started with an expertise from Phillips Exeter, but it seems like you've learned so much yourself and you're really good at
Oh
setting
yeah.
the stage and setting a perfect environment for this stuff. It's really, really cool.
And like not being afraid to like beg, borrow, and steal and use what's out there, because there are people who are doing it really well. I love going to see my colleagues as well and see how they do discussion and what moves that they do, because that's really important, especially when I think back to being a new teacher. I just wanted to know, how do I, like, what are the moves that I need to make that happen? So
Right, right. And so is your entire department discussion based, or are you trying to encourage others as well?
I'm trying to encourage, especially with my IB and AP teachers, to move more into this. IB assessment assesses a lot on reasoning and rationale. So thinking about how we can use this in our math and our science classes and move them toward this space. The English department, yes, is pretty heavy discussion based. And so I think opening this up for them as well to have more equitable discussions, because that isn't something that we tapped on, but like that is one of the biggest boons of Parlay, is the fact that you can track the equity within your discussion. Is one gender dominating? Is one person dominating? How is the discussion moving around the circle? So that's been very helpful for those colleagues that I kind of share this with, who have come and seen it. They're like, okay, I can see this happening. I think we just need to give ourselves the space to play with it, and then the space to just do it. Just Nike it. I think a lot of times as teachers, we just sit on it and we're like, I don't know. Or we use it and it's not magical the first time. And so we're like, well, that's horrible. And we throw it out. Versus like, I'm going to see how it works for me, see how I can make this tool work for me. But that's it. I love Parlay, and I'm excited to continue using it and to continue getting better at it.